Corps. So here we go. You're now being recorded. And once again, just for the recording, want to welcome everybody to the spotlight on St. John, New Brunswick, with Rhonda Peterson, who's married to David Peterson. And you have been, you said, in New Brunswick, I heard 46 years. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. 46 years.
And what's your journey been in YWAM? Did you do your DTS in Canada? Did you do it in Finland? You said you went to Finland and also from Christ for the Nations. Tell us a little bit about your YWAM experience.
Well, we were here. We came back in 78, and David was employed with my dad, actually, and he became an estimator for a plumbing and heating contractor. And so we were here for many years, with our local church, with ministry interdenominationally, with worship music and leading worship and different things like that. We did lots of things in our church with children and youth and families. And it was in 1994. I'm just checking my dates, but yeah, 1994. When we went full-time with King's Kids Ministry, we got involved from the church perspective, and years earlier than that, we led teams. And then actually YWAM Canada grandfathered us into the mission. We're that old. And with the promise that we would do a YWAM school within 5 years. And so we ended up, the school that we were going to go to got canceled. So we ended up in Switzerland, in Brittany area in 2003. And we ended up we said, we better just do a DTS so we can answer people's questions of where did you get your DTS? So yeah, we went there, and we went to Niger, Africa for our practicum and our outreach time. And that was in January 2004. And that was a very life-changing time for David and I, because we had never really been exposed to Muslim people before, and we lived and observed and engaged with Muslim people in Niger, Africa for those 3 months. And it was really, very life-changing.
That's beautiful, Rhonda. So it's I want to hear your story here in a little bit about what you have been currently doing, which sounds like that started getting birth all the way back on your outreach in Africa there. So that's really interesting. Before we get there, can you give us a little context of St. John? What is St. John? I think it's more of a kind of in between a town and a city, under 100,000 people. But what are some of the unique features that you find in St. John?
Oh, St. John is a port city. So we're on the Bay of Fundy, and the coldest, we have the highest tides in the world here. Beautiful tides that go in and out every day. And we're an industrial type of city. We have we have an oil refinery. We have a lot of wood, pulp and paper, that type of thing. So yeah, we've been, up until the last number of years, we have not had a lot of international people in our city. We've mostly been Caucasian, a lot of Irish descent, and French. We have the French in the north of the province. We're the only bilingual province in Canada. And so the last number of years, that's been changing a lot. Now we're for us, we're becoming very multicultural, which we're very happy about, actually.
Mm. And where are the people coming from that are coming into St. John?
St. John's we've been receiving refugees for the last, for decades, but just in small numbers. And then that's grown over the last number of years, the last decade, I suppose, with the Syrians that came. We had many Syrians who came in 2016. And Now we've had a lot of Afghans. Canada has received a lot of Afghan people. So they've been coming this last couple of years. And then we have them from all other kinds of nations too. But we have a lot of business immigrants coming into our city from India, particularly. And yeah, and so they're coming in quite large numbers right now into our province.
And the Syrians are primarily coming from a Muslim background.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And of course, the Afghans would also be from a Muslim background. Indians, where are the Indians coming from? Do you know if they're coming from Tamil Nadu or from Kerala or West Bengal? Are they Muslim? Are they Hindu?
I'm not sure. We're not connected so much with that community because we mostly work with former refugees. So I'm not really sure. I can't really answer that one.
And you said that you started working with King's Kids. How did you make the shift from King's Kids to doing what you've been doing the last many years?
I think when we were in King's Kids, our 4 children were with us. We were like a family in ministry even before we went into King's Kids. And so when they grew and left the home, and Ben and Micah were the last 2 with us when we were going to get our PCYM in Vancouver, actually. And then when that school was canceled, we decided to wait until the boys were up and out. And then we took a sabbatical year that year to do our DTS in Switzerland. And so when we came home, we experienced cross-cultural shock. We knew about it, re-entry, but re-entry was very, very difficult. And we had packed up our lives and lived out of a suitcase and rented our house. And when we came home, we weren't sure what to do next. We actually wanted to start a family intergenerational DTS, and we were walking with the Canadian leadership at the time to pioneer that school, a bit different than the other schools that have families together. And then David was diagnosed with cancer, in prostate cancer, in the middle of that journey in 2005. So it was like a bump in the road. And so he went through surgery and he was in recovery. We were still going to have the school that summer. And then, the Lord just said no to that quite sovereignly as we met with our board and our prayer council. And he spoke to us to just let that go for now. So in the fall of 2005, I had already, we have the YMCA in our city. I think it's probably a program in Canada in most of our settlement services, the places where we settle refugees. It's called the host program. It was called the host program. Now it's called First Friends, I believe. And you can volunteer to welcome a refugee, former refugee. Once they land in Canada, they're not refugees anymore. So we call them former refugees. And 2 hours a week, you would volunteer to go visit them and help them, whatever they needed help with. And so when we came home from Niger, when we were kind of lost and not knowing quite what to plug back into and how, I found this organization and I decided to volunteer. And I prayed and I said, Lord, I would love to have a Muslim family if possible, so I could learn more about them. And so I received a family from Afghanistan, a mom and dad and their son. And the only way I can explain it is like we sit across from each other at a table and somebody introduces us, somebody from the YMCA here. And I just fell in love with them, basically. I don't have other words for it. I just fell in love with this family. And sorry, I'm still in love with them. We're still in contact after all these years. They're in Toronto now. And so we didn't have language. They had no English language, but I started to visit them once a week on Wednesday afternoon for 2 hours. And we just, it's hard to describe it, but we just fell in love, and we ate together and we laughed together, and I tried to teach them some English, and yeah, it was amazing. It was an amazing time. And then Dave was diagnosed, so I had to they moved to Toronto. David, I walked with David. And so that fall of 2005, I said to David, we can't figure the YWAM thing out right now. So why don't we just um, take another family, go to the Y, take another family, and see where this leads us. We'll just journey with the Lord and another family, and we'll see where it leads us. And so we did that. And I prayed and asked the Lord for another Afghan family. And sure enough, we got another family from Afghanistan. And it was the very same experience. We sat across the table, we exchanged telephone numbers, address, and it was a love affair from the very first moment. Yeah.
Wow. As I'm interviewing Rhonda here, to those of you that are listening, please use the chat to ask any question you want to ask, and I'll ask it, or you can interrupt and ask the question too. But this is just really beautiful stories that are going on here. So Rhonda, what are some of the, I mean, when you meet these people, what are some of the obstacles and difficulties that you're trying to help them navigate through as they settle, and how do you do that?
One of the things that I've learned about myself during this journey is I love to advocate. And I think that I know that God is an advocate. He has a deep heart for advocating for us, as we know. And so, yeah, the challenges are many. When you don't come with language, when you come to a new country, you have no language, then that's a huge, huge hurdle. And so, helping people with language is one thing. There's all of our systems, our laws, like the laws of our land are so different than the laws of the lands where many people come from, the nations they come from. I mean, a small example is getting your driver's license, and being able to have a vehicle. In some countries, they don't have to have a driver's license. They just get a vehicle and get behind the wheel and they drive it. And so here that's against the law. You can get in trouble with the law, and you can be arrested. So I've advocated. Yeah, my job as an advocate is very broad, and I could tell many stories of advocating for people. Education is another thing. Like the Bhutanese community came to us years ago, and they were originally from Nepal, but they were thrown out of Bhutan and went back to Nepal as refugees, actually. And so they came, and for one example, there was we welcomed the Hindu priest and his extended family. They came all at once, and so their son had an education. He was able to get an education in Nepal, and it was in English. But when he ended up at the YMCA at the time, they had very little English there. He was in a triage class with people with no language. So here's a young man who has English, speaks English, has an education in English, his first degree, and his life this is all he had offered. And so he wanted to know, could he go to university here? And I said, well, why not? So let's go. So I take him to the university, and no, the answer is no. And it's like, well, why? I mean, I've learned to go to the top in advocating, like, go to the top, go to the person at the top who has authority. And so I went to the top, to the registrar, and I said, well, why can't Raghu come to university here? Well, he's a refugee. And I go, well, he's not a refugee anymore. He's got his permanent status here in Canada. And so, long story short, yeah, sometimes the people at the heads of our institutions are not educated in who people are and what they can and can't do. So long story short, we got him in and he got his education and second degree. And that was very, yeah, very satisfying to be able to advocate and see somebody succeed. He was young, young family. Yeah.
And I'm sure I'm sure that was very much appreciated by that particular person of you becoming an advocate for them.
Yes.
That's just really, really meaningful. So
Another thing we did with the Bhutanese community was I was teaching, I got my TESOL when I came back from Niger, and I taught at the YMCA where David's now working there, but he wasn't at the time. But when I taught there, the Bhutanese, one of the guys came to me one day and said, Rhonda, do you know where we could get a piece of land to garden, to have a garden? Because they came from agriculture and they were in the city in these little apartments. And so I thought, we have land. We live rurally, and we're opposite to Dayspring Ministries, and we have lots of land. So I said, well, we have land. I could talk to our board and see if we could have a garden out here for you. Long story short, we did that, and we bused them out of the city to where we live, right across actually from our dooryard, and made a lovely garden. And so we gardened together for about 4 years. And it was like the whole Hindu community at the time, because we didn't have very many Hindu people in our city. And they were all in our dooryard growing vegetables. And we grew vegetables with them, and we shared our knowledge, and we shared food. And it was an amazing time. Yeah, just
wow.
amazing time becoming friends with yeah,
What
friends
I'm
and
hearing,
family.
what I'm hearing is that it's not very transactional, it's very relational.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's giving you a lot of bridges just to be a friend while
Yes.
you're advocating and you're doing your job. I'm sure that there are certain things that you have to do to fulfill your job as a volunteer, but you must be going beyond the call of duty and developing the friendships. That's beautiful.
Yeah, these things we would have done. I mean, we were both full time with YWAM at the time. We never really use our name as YWAM. We just are Rhonda and David, and just befriending, the people God puts in our path. But we're allowed. I mean, the beauty of YWAM, as all of you probably know, is there's not a lot of bureaucracy to go because of our autonomy. There's not a lot of bureaucracy. So if you want to create something, you just go ahead and do it. So that's a beauty that we've discovered in YWAM, that at first when we came into YWAM, we weren't sure about that because we were used to a different structure within our church life or our Christian life. But it's a real beauty because you can just see a need, and as the Lord leads, you create a path to meet that need.
Yes, I think that is something that all of us on the call need to just recognize.
Mm.
YWAM has a lot of its challenges and problems, but one of the beauties of it is that we're pretty free to do whatever God tells us to do. And this in St. John is a legitimate YWAM ministry without a DTS. And this is the type of YWAM ministries that I'm praying for would be multiplied all over North America and throughout the world, where it might just be a couple or a small team, but they're very focused on what God has called them to. In this case, reaching out to unreached people groups.
Yes,
Really
yes.
beautiful. Rhonda, what would you say to those of us living in these different cities of North America? How can we get started? I noticed Sanjay in Las Vegas. He put in the chat, he's said, we as a family also work with Afghanis here. And so just wanted to hear your experience of talking to them about God, which I want to get to that next. But how would you encourage us to get involved as YWAM North America in working with newcomers or refugees or immigrants or different names that they go by in our cities?
Well, one thing you can do is find out who is settling them. Like, what agencies are settling newcomers? We call them newcomers, is the broader name now. We've sort of changed names, but former refugees or newcomers. And then offer to serve there. Sometimes I think in this United States, I think you have a beauty that I understand. Maybe somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think when Mr. Bush was your president, that he opened the door for churches and nonprofits to be involved in helping settle the. Is that right, Tim? Settle the government-sponsored refugees. Like, I think your government just looks after them maybe for 3 months, and then they're on their own. But Christian organizations can help them. Here, the government sponsors for 1 year, government-sponsored refugees. And so they look after them financially for 1 year. And these agencies, and David is working right now. He's been seconded, Youth with the Mission leaders in Canada. He was asked to come and actually take a job there in 2013. And so that was like, we didn't know, could we do that? Like, as YWAMers, could we do that? And so, yeah, Pierre, you were on the Canada's leadership team then, I believe, right? And yeah, so David was seconded to the YMCA to do this. And so that's possible, that you get right into the heart of the field and serve there. And so that's been amazing, because David has had the opportunity. He's on the ground, and his team goes to the airport and picks the people up and brings them to their temporary housing. And then they look after them for the first 6 weeks until they get an apartment of their own. They help them find their housing and do all of that. So they get to know them. They're the first people that they meet. And so as believers, when we're the first people, that the people meet, David calls it like the chicken and the egg, like they get attached, to you, and they get attached because you've helped them. And with us, it's loving them and serving them. So yeah, if you have that ability to, in your cities where you are, to find who brings them in and who serves them, who settles them, who finds their apartment, who welcomes them, who teaches them, how to live in our cities. And then if it's open to open to you to be that person, then it's a wonderful place of influence.
I'm just curious, as we're on the call here, how many are working with immigrants, refugees, newcomers in our cities? If you could just raise your hand, or okay, so I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Wow, fantastic. Five different locations, at least, that are here, that are in some way working with people that are newcomers in our different cities. That's fantastic.
Another way is with language. When people don't have English, there's a lot of room there to volunteer. Either if you can't find a place who's already doing it and come along and assist them, you can create your own, forum. However, Dave and I had a group we called Chat and Tea for many, many years, because we found that there wasn't enough English we had one place in our city that was serving that capacity, and it wasn't enough. And it was only for our former refugees. So other immigrants couldn't access, English. So we opened it up, and we had we did babysitting at it too, so moms could come, because mothers often are isolated, because they have a child at home, a young one. They can't go. They couldn't go to our English services until the child was over 2. So that's 2 years of isolation for mothers, and they can get very depressed, and yeah, they're not connected, and they don't know anyone. So that's a huge field too, is offering English conversation, and twice a week in the mornings at a church opened up that we used freely. We ran that for maybe years. Yeah, a lot of years.
I love that name, Chat and Tea.
Yeah.
Sanjay and I were in charge of that program. We might change it to Chat and Chai, but that's a really great name. Anything that's relational. I've seen one of the strategies that's working more and more is simple conversations lead to serious conversations, lead to spiritual conversations. The 3 S's: simple to serious to spiritual. Can you share with us, Rhonda, before I open it up for any questions, um, maybe one story of how you've been able to share your faith or connect people to conversations of faith?
I think it was in 2000, and I'm just looking back, maybe 2010. 2006, we had a family come in, and a friend of ours was actually the host, the friends of this family, and they were from Iran and through Turkey. And so one day our friend called us up, and she said, I don't know what these people are talking about. The mother is saying the word Isa, Isa. And so we knew that the word Isa was the name for Jesus in that language. So we said, oh, she's talking something about Jesus. So I said, why don't we come with you? So we went with her to this visit, and we met Saida and Afshin and Roxana. And so it was again, there's moments that are kind of life changing, I find, and so impactful on your life. And so we got there, and they had very little English. We used the Google Translate on the computer to kind of talk. And so she was telling us about this dream she had, and this man was in it, and his name was Isa. And so the dream was it was so intimate, and whether she was whether it was a dream or a visitation, she wasn't really sure, because she was sleeping. And then when she went to wake up, he was lying there, on the bed, waiting for her to wake up. And then she said when she woke up, she looked, and it was the look. It was when she looked into his eyes, she fell in love with him. She said, I love Isa. I love Isa, but she didn't know who he was. Like, she'd been on a search. Like, who was this man who visited me? So it was like this. Yeah, it was so, the presence of God in that little apartment that day, in that living room, was something I'd never experienced before. And so before we left, through the Google, we said, well, we know this Isa, and so we can introduce you to him. It was tough. We needed a translator. So we decided, we had tea and tea plus. And so we got in a little circle, and I said, why don't we pray? We're going to talk to Isa before we go home. And so we did, and they wanted a chair. It was so interesting. They put an empty chair in the little circle, because that chair was for Isa. So he said, and I think Isa sat down in the chair. Seriously, it was so powerful. and the presence of God just came, and we asked him to come and reveal himself to this family. And so long story short, they wanted church. They wanted to go to a church. They had come from Turkey, and Roxana actually had gone. There was somebody there that had taken her to a church. So church, they wanted to go to church. So we brought them to our church. We were at an Anglican church at the time, St. James the Less. And so one day we went to pick them up, and Saida was crying. She was crying so hard she couldn't get stopped. And I said to Roxana, who was getting some English in school, I said, "What's wrong with mom?" And she said, "Oh," she said, "they were watching on the computer. They were watching YouTube songs that were in Farsi, and the song, I forget the name of the song, but it had the Jesus film on the back of it, running while the song was being sung. And it was the cross, like the Jesus dying. And so this song was all about the love, and the cross and forgiveness. And so Jesus had come to her that morning with the revelation of the cross. And she had already met him, but she didn't know he died for her. And so she was so broken. She was so broken about her friend, this man that she fell in love with had died, for her. And so she came into the kingdom, just so sovereignly. And we were just there to nurture. And because they didn't have English, and because they would sit in church, like they would whisper in our ear all the time, like, what's happening? What's happening? What's going on? So David decided we need to pull aside and we need to create a home, a home setting. So we started a home church actually for the Farsi speaking people. And it grew, and God sent, it was amazing. God sent us, the next couple that came were believers, and they were from the underground church in Iran. And they were cousins of these guys. Like it was amazing.
Amazing. One of the things that we're doing here on the spotlight as we gather is I'm having these people that are interviewing, like Rhonda or like Amy and Chris and the others that were from Modesto last time. Where would you take me in your city to prove to me that God is alive? And I think we just had a feast here today with Rhonda of answering that question. She's been taking us into her different settings and showing us that God is alive in some of these beautiful relationships that starts with advocacy or helping them with some of their programs, but then leading into beautiful faith conversations with one another. I want to just open it up in the last few minutes here. If anybody has questions, I see Doug and Carolyn, you got your hand up. Or is that because you put something in the chat? If you want to ask a question, go ahead. Great to hear what you're doing at the U of Manitoba and using alpha groups. So if you have a question or you want to make a comment.
Well, more of a comment, but just to echo similar things. And I teach research writing for graduate students. And so these are not underprivileged people coming. And yet we managed to find our ways into their lives through serving them. There's two Chinese couples a couple of years ago. They were taking my course online from China. Then they moved to Winnipeg, two separate families. We helped them get settled, find a place, all the friend things, started Alpha. And these two women, both wives, said, "Yes, my grandmother used to take me to church when I was a little girl in China." And the husband of one in the Alpha, he was so eager to become a believer. It was amazing. And then last fall, one of these wives passed away from cancer. And the only people she would let her husband bring to the bedside was us. And she bonded with Carolyn so intensely as a mother-daughter. And so, I mean, just being there. But the comment I would want to make to the rest of us who may not have experience teaching or training in English is that if you're doing one of these conversation groups, you don't have to be an English teacher. You just have to be a coherent English speaker. which rules some of us out, the coherent part. But you don't have to have a lot of skill to come to carry on that conversation. So don't fear it. Yeah,
All
that's
right.
it.
Very good. Yeah, we'll have to strike Pierre off of that uh, teaching assignment. I'm just kidding you, Pierre. Don't worry. Anybody else want to ask a question or give a comment? This is very rich stuff. And I just want to encourage us all to think outside the box. We have that freedom in YWAM. And I think you've heard some interesting things here of how they're holding a job, reaching people, and then Doug working as a professor, I would imagine, at the U of Manitoba, but
Part-time instructor.
part-time instructor, and yet in YWAM somehow. So it's possible, guys. It's
Yeah.
possible.
Tim, if I could just add on here, just to go back to what Doug just shared, but also Rhonda about Peter, about David working full time under the umbrella of the YMCA, which is the partner organization of the federal immigration in Canada. So in 2013, with our YWAM Canada leadership during the Panama conference, we gathered for several days and had several meetings as Canadians. And we came to the conclusion that anyone, at least within our YWAM Canada context, who pursued professional work, had an income, and was working under an umbrella other than YWAM, but doing so in continuity with their calling and in their ministry calling with YWAM, were still YWAMers, even if they can't be at all of our meetings. And that's virtually what we've created. And I would like so many more people take advantage of that liberty. Often working, some of the best stuff that YWAM does is under the radar because it's not under the YWAM umbrella. It's not profiled in DTSs, etc. There are such rich stories, and the connections, the capacity to integrate, within the broader social structures of our cities or countries. In key contexts, just to one last thing concerning Rhonda and David, with their chat and tea, with the garden, etc. Several times they were interviewed by CBC Radio. I remember those interviews, where they were profiled. What they were doing was so unique in the New Brunswick context that they were they had a high profile. That people through Eastern Canada were familiar with the work that they were doing. So yeah, get out of the box where you can, and not to get out of the box, but simply to pursue the heart calling that is yours, and to take the full freedom to do that with YWAM blessing and with continuity of relationship, and still as members of YWAM.
Yes, we call them, we call them, as like Rhonda is or like Doug is, I would call them sphere missionaries who their job is congruent with their calling, and their calling is congruent with YWAM. And as they step out, they go into fields, and sometimes it's a paying job, but it's still congruent. They're not working for money, they're working because the call of God is upon them to do what God has called them to do. And it all mixes into be part of YWAM. So it's interesting stuff. Anybody else want to make a comment or ask a question? Because we are now at 11:47. I'm 2 minutes over the 45-minute call.
I might just say, Tim, that in Canada, they're called members of parliament. They're the people we vote in and out federally that represent us. And what I've learned in my advocacy work is that they're there to work for me, basically, right? Because I can vote them in and I can vote them out. And so they are one of the yeah, they know a lot. And so when you advocate for things, you can go to them, and they're obligated actually to help us. And so some of my advocacy work of a Somali family, we don't have time to tell that story, but there was 4 children that were left behind and needed to come and be reunited with their family. And so I worked with my MP for almost a year to get those children here. And it was an amazing journey. They weren't educated in this, and I didn't know what I was doing, but together with God and some little YWAMer couple in Ethiopia, Sammy and Ruth, God used them to be the connectors to these children who basically were orphaned. I mean, their parents were here, and they were there. And so we needed to get them here to be reunited. So yeah, whatever your governmental structure is, they can be very helpful.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm going through something similar now, or we are, with that lady who passed away. Her husband was not working and didn't have status here. So their ability to stay in the country with their 3 kids is now in doubt. And we're going to our provincial MLAs to try to get them to be able to stay here.
All right, guys. Well, if there's no other questions, this concludes our little spotlight on St. John. If you have recommendations of where you want me to focus another spotlight, please email me. I think you all have my email address, since you're on the invite here, or if you came through Facebook, my email is just simply tim@ywamsanfrancisco.org. And if you have other suggestions, I really looking more and more to help interviews, some that are maybe not necessarily in the mainstream of YWAM. And I think this one from St. John and the last one from Modesto really are doing some out of the box things that we need to learn about and how we can take it forward. So thanks for coming, guys, and have a good, well, on the West Coast, have a good lunch. The rest of you have a good afternoon.
Good job, Rhonda.
Yes, Rhonda, great job.
Say hi to Dave for us.
I will.
And I'll see you in June.
My love to all of you. Hi, Donna. Nice to see you.
Really good to be with you, Rhonda. It was wonderful. And Tim, thanks for doing this. It was
Yeah,
great.
it's fun.
It's very interesting. There's a young man here with the YWAM Associates and YWAM. You guys have really got me thinking,
Good.
because we always say they're still family,
Mhm.
but I don't know. There's something here that God is doing.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering this in my heart. Thanks, Pierre. Merci beaucoup.
Larry and Elsie, good to see you after so many years.
Wow. Yeah.
Great
Thanks,
to see you
Tim.
guys. I have to run. I have another appointment at 12 o'clock. So
Bless you.
I'll see you guys. God bless.
Bye.